Hi folks, this is Dr. Rob CYWES, and one of the things I love about my work is I encounter all these things just make me smile. They're quirky little things, and sometimes they make me think, sometimes they make me cry just a little bit, but I love my work because of how it excites me and makes me feel good. And sometimes these videos are science-based and sometimes they're specific topics, but what I've been collecting in my head and what I want to talk about today, and I think you'll find this entertaining, are just some random thoughts, random things that have happened, random stories, some of them serious, some of them funny, some of them burp, and most of these are going to be the burps. So as part of the restoration of my health, I've introduced a weekly cycle for myself where I have no Calorie Mondays. And one of the things about no Calorie Mondays, going from Sunday night to Tuesday night without eating, is that I want to accelerate the rate at which my liver empties out and I get into ketosis. So the way I do that in the mornings is I do a lot of physical activity. I walk my dog, but in the mornings I go for a run on the morning of a fast. So I'm about 8-12 hours in, I go for a run. And when I come back from that run, the purpose of the run is to empty sugar from my liver. And when I come back from my run, I hit a ketone IQ. This ketone IQ has a few calories to it, but it doesn't technically break the fast. What that does is it switches me over into a ketogenic state much quicker, so I get into fat burning and I don't feel the effects of not eating through the day. It's a beautiful bounce in the morning. And again, try it, do the experiment. I found it works for me. See if it works for you. The first story I'll just tell, and this is like a nut story, and it's so common. I just had this past few days a patient of mine who was in the hospital, a diabetic patient, had heart failure, went into the hospital, and they're very carb conscious. And what happened is the patient goes into the hospital and they give them steroids and they give them sugar in the IV, dextrose. So always look at your IV and make sure there's no dextrose in the IV, or at least ask why there's dextrose in the IV. So the guy has a blood glucose over 300. Now he's normally running at a much, much lower blood sugar. He's normally in the 80s to 90s. Doesn't eat carbohydrates. And he and his wife are very fastidious about this. Actually done very, very well. Unfortunately, started doing really well after he was already too sick from a cardiovascular perspective, but he's already done well. Nevertheless, in the hospital, blood sugar over 300, so they start giving him insulin. And they bring him his food, and he refuses to eat the carbohydrates on the plate. Now, remember this, if you don't have diabetes and you want diabetes, check into a hospital as a patient for a week and you will have diabetes based on the crap they feed you. Okay? Probably, and I'm tongue in cheek there, but the single worst place you could probably eat healthily is in a hospital. Again, boggles the mind. So this guy's on insulin with a blood sugar, probably in diabetic ketoacidosis, although they didn't measure his ketones. He's on insulin and he's got a blood sugar over 300. And the dietitian, the nurse is really upset because he didn't eat his carbohydrates. And he really ate nothing. There was a little piece of turkey on the plate, which is lean protein anyway. And so they, because he's diabetic, diabetics have to eat carbohydrates, don't they? So the dietitian comes in and really berates him for not eating carbohydrates. And he says, dude, this is what I'm doing. I don't eat carbohydrates. I've come off my diabetic medication. My blood sugars are normal. This 300 is a problem. And she just berates him. Your brain needs sugar. You have to eat sugar. So over time, his blood sugar drifts down on the insulin, and because he's not eating carbohydrates, his blood sugars come down into the 120s. And the dietitian comes back and again berates him about not eating carbohydrates. So he says, okay, let's do this. Let's do this. And he eats a carbohydrate. He eats the bun on the burger, and his blood sugar goes screaming up to over 300. And the dietitian comes in and says, oh, now you need insulin. You have to be on insulin. You're an insulin-dependent diabetic. So he says to her, I ate the bun. And she says, yes, your brain needs carbohydrates. So her whole thing is, your brain has to have carbohydrates. But when I eat carbohydrates, my blood sugar goes up to 300, and you have to give me insulin to bring my blood sugar down, and I'm in diabetic ketoacidosis because of the sugar I ate, And you're giving me insulin to bring my blood sugar down, but when I don't eat carbohydrates, my blood sugar is normal, it's not low. So, where is my brain getting carbohydrates from if I don't eat them? Oh, but you have to eat carbohydrates. Your brain needs them. I was at 300. You're trying to push my sugar down when I eat those carbohydrates. Again, that is the illogic nature of that discussion, and she wouldn't let him go. She would not let that go because she couldn't compute the fact that you will survive without your brain imploding like the darn submersible around the Titanic, just crashing down. That was nasty because 5 people did die. But your brain is just not suddenly going to implode if you don't eat carbohydrates because your liver makes them. And the sad part is this is a confrontation that happens every day out there. Just an anecdote from the last couple of days. Next serious anecdote. I got called by a distraught mother a few months ago. And she was at a pediatrician, and she has a very lean, very healthy young daughter who's 10 years old, who's eating a similar diet to what she's on, not eating carbohydrates, more on the carnivore side, not quite as much as my son, omnicarnivore, vegetables and plants, but on a ketogenic-based diet. And at 10 years old, completely healthy child, there for a healthy visit, they do blood work, and they test, her blood sugar is normal, low normal, but they test her lipids, her cholesterol and her LDL are elevated, and they prescribe a statin. They prescribe a statin. No risk factors, unless you consider a high LDL. Triglycerides are low, HDL is high, I've seen the blood work, they prescribe a statin. And the mother comes to me and says, what do I do? So I said, look, you need to go back and talk to your doctor. So she goes back and talks to the doctor, and she says, look, I'm uncomfortable. This is the science behind it. She's got the papers. She's got all the evidence. Here in Florida, and the doctor reports her to DCF for child abuse, for neglect, for not taking a statin. At least threatens to do so. I don't know if the report went through itself, but threatens if you don't give your child the statin, we're going to bring DCF in because it's child neglect, and you are causing this child cardiovascular harm by not putting him on a statin for high cholesterol. That, folks, is a huge problem for this parent. Lord knows kids are facing too much difficulty. So what I said to the mom is, I said, agree to take the statin, get the script, fill the script. And then tell the doctor, even if you give your child one of the doses, ask the child if she has muscle pain. She feels a little depressed. Because statins have a very high side effect ratio. And then go back to the doctor and say, hey, we've got all these side effects from the statin. And at least the doctor can then go, allergic to statins. To satisfy the algorithm that they want their patients to fit into, but not harm the child. But that's where we are. That's where we are. This is what I face every day in my practice. Those kinds of questions. And then the other thing is, not right away, but perhaps say you've moved but move away from that pediatrician because trust has been broken. Trust has been broken. Just sad, sad stories. And here's another little story. I had a patient a little bit ago in my office, a parent and their child. And it's interesting, this is now an adult child, young adult in the early 20s. And the child has metabolic health, good kid, but has metabolic health issues. And dad has been a patient of mine for a long time, has done amazingly well, just amazingly well. And so desperately wants the child to do well as well. And they have no relationship. They have no relationship as a parent to their child. And it's the most devastating thing. Consciously for the dad, unconsciously for the son. And why do they not have a good relationship? And this is so important because, folks, when we talk about an effort-based emotion management system, a system that you can rely on for emotional buoyancy that builds self-esteem, self-confidence, and self-respect, one of the cornerstones of a healthy, effort-based, diverse emotion management system is empathetic human connection. And it so often goes wrong in a child's early teenage years. And here's how it often goes wrong. And if you're aware of it, you can either restore this or prevent it by being aware of it as you raise your children. Remember, folks, early on, no matter how good or bad a parent you are, early on, you are that child's universe. Under the age of 8, you are that child's universe. You are the hero to that child. You are everything. And they emulate your behavior. No matter what you say to them, they do as you do. And they place absolute trust in you. They do that automatically. And that trust that that child, that young baby has in you is yours to preserve and nurture or break. And most of us desperately want that trust, that unconditional trust, with our children to last until they bury us. However, we don't understand it. We don't know how it works. And as parents, we so desperately want our children to be successful that we teach them. We teach them. We tell them things. We give them advice. And the problem is that while we parents desperately want our children to be successful, to do well, to be better than we are ourselves, and we've learned, we have experience, we have knowledge, we want to impart that knowledge to them, so we tell them. But as those children grow up, as they get into the 10, 12, early adolescence and into adolescence, they're trying to figure this stuff out. They're trying to learn about who they are, what they can trust, what they can't trust, what they can do, what they can't do. And then we're going to make mistakes. They're going to make mistakes. They may try really hard, they may not try at all, but they're going to make mistakes, they're going to try. And when a child puts effort into something and it doesn't go so well, or it goes well, but you want them to do better, what do? You give them good advice. You give them good advice at exactly the time that they're worried about how they can do better what they didn't do. And they don't hear good advice. They don't hear, oh, this is something I should try. All they hear when you stand in their shoes, and that's why we talk about empathetic human connection, all that child hears is, I'm not good enough. That's why dad is telling me how to be better. I'm not good enough. He's criticizing me. He's judging me. And the greatest threat to that implicit trust that young child has put in you as a parent is a feeling or a sense of criticism and judgment, because it hurts and it shatters. It absolutely shatters trust. Because they've pedestalized you. You are their parent. And it shatters that trust. How can the person I love the most in the world be hurting me? And all they feel is that extraordinary pain that parents are unaware of. And what does a child do? They do one of two things. They either close down and they shut down the relationship, and they shut in and they break trust. They sever themselves. They unhinge from you as a parent. Or they act out. They act out at you. They get angry at you. They hit you. They shout at you. They yell at you. I don't love you. They smack you. They're acting out, not because they're angry, but because they're hurt. Or they try to punish you. And often by punishing you, they're punishing themselves. They're trying to find solace. They're trying to find safety. They're trying to find a good feeling somewhere. So where do they turn? They turn to vaping. They turn to carbohydrates. They turn to teenage sex, where they find it from a sexual partner rather than a human connection. They do dysfunctional things that harm you and harm them. They become delinquent. They don't do their homework. They, even in subtle ways, they stop playing their sport because they feel that the sport is more important to win and do what their parents say. And that sport, instead of being this wonderful thing that they love to do, has become a source of criticism from the person they love the most. And they sever the relationship, and the animosity grows and the distance grows. Not because they hate you, but because they love you and you've broken that. Or at least they feel that. And yet you can't understand it because all you desperately want them to do is to be successful, and you love them and you want them to love you back. Folks, the way to deal with that, and this is the conversation we had with this particular father and son. Think about this. If you're out in the woods and there's a deer, and you hold out some corn or some food for the deer, and you sit very, very quietly. You sit very, very quietly. And slowly, carefully, the deer comes to that food and starts eating some of the food. That's the connection you're trying to establish. But what do? You reach out and try to pet the deer. And the first thing it does is run away. That's what you've done with your child in a much more vivid way. That relationship can be restored. It doesn't get restored by giving them money or by giving them things or with promises. The P word that you want to use for your child is presence. Be present. Don't give presents, be present. You can give present, that's fine. But be present. But be present, excuse me, be present in a quiet way. In a way where slowly, and the child won't come right away, just like that deer, where the child slowly can reform that trust. And the worst thing you can do is give the child advice. Tell the child anything. Just be present, create the space. Maybe even go to your child to ask their advice. But don't give them any advice. And slowly, when they start to trust you again, they'll slowly start to talk about things that are bothering them, because the value of a strong relationship with anybody, not just with your child, but with your partner, with anybody, or the friend, is implicit trust in that person that they will not be critical or judgmental of you, so that you can take the risk of being vulnerable in that space. So not only does that child have to rebuild that trust, but they also have to take the risk of being vulnerable and talking about things they're struggling with, talking about shame, because a child, and especially an adolescent, should not be taught. They should learn. They should be given an environment where they can learn and where they can pick up facts. They can be given direction. That's what teachers do. They give them information, but the child has to synthesize it, process it, ask why, challenge it, and be given that safe environment where they can explore their knowledge, where they can learn. They can practice and learn in a safe space. And if that child can come to you, not for your advice, but for your presence, so that they can sort through with their own knowledge and maybe bounce some of that off you without you saying anything. Bounce that off you in that space and figure it out for themselves and learn to handle tough emotional problems in that relationship. They are going to be effective human beings, capable of good relationships with a wife, with a husband, with a partner down the road forever. But if they can't trust you, they will never be able to effectively trust people out there. And when that child says, "What do you think, Dad?" don't tell them what you think. Phrase it as a question. Ask them, "Hey, what do you think?" And then praise them for their thoughts. But don't give them advice. Don't give them advice. Let them seek advice from you, because they're seeking their own advice. They're seeking to figure this out. The knowledge is already there. You don't be a teacher, be a parent. Be someone that gives them the space to learn. And you will have that connection for the rest of your life. And hopefully, they will cry at your funeral when they bury you one day. They won't cry because they lose you. They cry because of the good memory. It's my dad. I am the Carb Addiction Doc. Personal story that was. These random thoughts sometimes are just fun to listen to. And we'll have more of them in the future if you like them. Leave comments down below. If you like these comments, if you like these thoughts, if you like the random thoughts, leave comments down below. Tell me about your own experiences. Till next time.